Welcome back. How are you doing, Dr. Ed?
I am new and improved with a stable internet connection, a nice warming microphone, hopefully. People are going to comment on my voice, and standing desk, treadmill desk. I'm not walking at the moment, so it's all good. But yeah, Bitcoin is $71,000 per coin. So the world is changing
Winning.
because that money's coming from somewhere.
Yeah. There's been a lot of money being invested into Bitcoin. I think that they said there was, for the first time, there was so much demand, but there was no supply because there's no more Bitcoin to sell.
Right,
So
and it's
people were
about to
trying to
half as
buy it
well.
and you just couldn't buy it. But the halving is happening soon, right?
Yeah, so in theory,
So that should be exciting. All the crypto stuff.
I
Another
think
white
it's
boy with a
a
podcast.
yeah, it's a sign that people are becoming less happy with uh, the standard options in their lives that they're presented. I mean, you can go all the way back to governments, but I think just if you do the same thing over and over again, and it's kind of like people are getting disappointed with it because it doesn't really solve their problem. There's still people struggling and health, wealth, and all of those things. I think it's just a different solution.
Yeah, I was watching a show on YouTube. It's funny because you can say like the news or this or that, but in reality, it's like you're watching a reel on TikTok or Instagram, or in this case, it was in YouTube, and they were talking to. They were where were they? What's in the north of the UK?
Well,
I'm already messing
Manchester.
it up. So they were in a city north of the U Manchester. Yes, thank you. It was there at the tip of my tongue. I don't know why I want to start with a W. They were in Manchester and they were asking people what they think like the average salary is in the UK and how much people are making and what's the 1% or like how much money you need to earn a year to be in the 1%. It's extremely low. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, the average income is so low, and now that you have a completely there's so much power to decentralize yourself and do online coaching or this or
Whatever.
that, you really have a lot of power to monetize any sort of skill that you have. Hormozy just came out with his school games, which is absolutely genius what he's doing because he's getting a cut of everything. It's so good outside of you paying the $99 to host on his platform and then also getting the transactions because all of the transactions are happening through that platform. Like, oh, dude, that dude's it's killing it. It's genius. But, everybody and anyone can essentially start to make some good, some good money if you just keep up with the times. And I think that the next step will be kind of the decentralization, and we'll see the cryptos coming into play. But anywho, I thought we were a health and lifestyle podcast, Ed. Now we got into the cryptos.
Yeah. Well, they're tied together somehow. I think it's basic principles. It's like the
That's we need
Bitcoin
Jack Cruz
is
back on.
it's based on mathematics. They're all the basic principles, and we work with the basic principles of health and movement and fitness. So that's my segue into you
Right.
complaining.
Yeah. If you're going to a fucking Globo gym, put away your fucking weights. Okay, people? I'm sick and tired of these dudes that think that they're all this and they leave the weights on the machines. It just pisses me off beyond comprehension. Like I don't get it. And I'm not going to be an asshole in the gym and walk up to you and kind of want to bitch slap you like your mother should have because you didn't put away your weights. So if you're in the gym, just put away your weights, guys. Keep it nice and tidy. We're not paying. We're paying to use the equipment. We're not paying to have people clean up after ourselves. Anywho, that one was been building up. I keep seeing these guys that come in and they have like the fake alpha mentality and they try to stack things up, which is not even that much weight, but because they'll use like the 10 kilos, they can have a bunch of plates on there and they just walk away from the machine like somebody else is like needs to put that away. Really bothers me, especially if you have somebody that's brand new to the gym and then they probably won't use the machine. So like that's going to be a whole lot of work. You know what I mean? So
It's
public
even
service
worse when they
announcement: put
put
away your
the
equipment
heavy
after you
plates
use it,
back on top of the light plates. So they'll like ruin the whole
mm,
stalks and things. That's even
dude.
worse.
Yeah, I get the business mentality of these global gyms is just like get membership in, but there should be some sort of on ramp of like, hey, put your equipment away. This is how you should do it. Something. Maybe these people are ignorant to the fact that the same 20 goes with the same 20, and it goes at the bottom of the stack, not at the top. I mean, the Salience network is not working well with these people. It's failing them. The pattern recognition is not there. Oh. So, anywho, how about the assessments? You've been getting quite a few assessments, and some cool clients coming in. How's that going?
Yeah, I have had some interesting cases presented to me. Just like I say, interesting, complex, which is always nice. And I think I was thinking about this. It all comes back to that, and I should do a piece of content around it because Guy mentioned it. The paper that explained the Wim Hof method, like when Wim Hof took his breathing and cold
Mm-hmm.
exposure to the universities and how they showed that they could control their autonomic nervous system, which enabled them to control their immune system. Nobody since then has, at least in the medical world, jumped to the conclusion that we can control our nervous system. Like it's just something that's passive and certain things will happen and they will lead a certain direction. But with breathing and movement, we can obviously change that. So we have these cases where
Right.
there's nothing we can find on tests. We've done tilt tables, we've done EEGs, we've done all of these physiological tests because the blood tests are normal. And again, it's all normal. And yet these people are collapsing or they're having strange seizure-like activity and they're able to perform at a very high level, but for some reason, certain stresses in their environment lead them to have these sudden symptoms that prevents them being able to do what they want to do. So rather than saying what the rest of the medical world say is
Right.
there's nothing wrong, I look to see if there is something.
Yeah. Now, with a seizure, is that technically a sympathetic freeze? It's not a full collapse, right? Because a full collapse would be like you pass out.
Yeah, the
So it's a full panic mode of the body and it just freezes.
the logical progression of thinking about seizures is they use vagal nerve stimulators to reduce seizure activity or stop seizures. So you can assume that it's an imbalance between the
Okay.
sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. So by building that vagal tone and increasing the stress while still maintaining that vagal tone, we, in theory, should be able to reduce that threshold for these kind of things happening.
Huh. Yeah, it's I was working with a fighter that kept getting knocked out, and my idea, right, is it's just we just need to reteach the behavior at the neurological level and obviously the cellular level of where it finds that overwhelming stress that wants to make you shut down. You need to first create the safety, and then from there build the confidence, and then go to performance. And this is somebody that had like just like a tiny tap, and he would knock out under high stress. So during training, he'd be okay, but under high stress, meaning now you have you're in the ring and actually fighting. That's when it would kick in. So my idea was we need to induce the same amount of stress, but reteach the body that it shouldn't knock itself out. Which I don't know if we might be sacrificing some safety mechanisms here in order for the performance of winning a competition. But we were playing with Swami and kind of redoing the tapping and creating safety through the Swami and the re-education and kind of doing like a vagal reset of the tapping of the cheekbones and the jawbone. Um, and kind of resetting the lymphatic system and its reaction. And then from there, we could take it into conditioning and then sparring, and then, basically just creating pressure under high stress and seeing how he can rebuild that him getting touched in the jaw is no longer a dangerous situation. Again, now this is for a very short-term reward of trying to win a competition. I don't know what the long-term point of view would be. When you're seeing it with high-level athletes that are having these sort of panic attack seizures, I'm wondering if it's also part of the psychological side of like the super ego fighting harshly against like the true self or the id, and that also creates a big somatic error that causes the sympathetic freeze. It would be interesting to just check it out. I mean, I think you're doing a pretty good job with activating certain muscles and getting a fight in certain areas.
Yeah, we had some good DOMs. I got feedback this morning, so we'll just see how it goes.
Beautiful.
The problem with these athletes is that they put in a lot of volume doing the thing that they've always done, and it's giving them enough counter to that volume to allow the system to learn something new.
Right.
Also, I don't know, my
Yeah,
connection's
and they
supposed to
become
be
so
good.
good at adapting to skill.
Yeah, it's everything is learning.
It's a bit on the slow side, but I can
I've
hear
got a
you.
delay. It's so strange. Like I'm gonna have to
Right.
complain. Everything is a learned behavior, and even if it's not a
Yeah.
conscious choice of learning, it's still a learned behavior. I think that's the next stage in understanding how humans can be helped. It's what they're looking into with
Right.
psychedelic therapy, is that we have these neural pathways that we create over time, and it's realizing that we can uncreate them, unlearn to relearn, but there needs to be some acknowledgement that that's possible before we can actually start doing it in the mainstream, at least.
Right. I think it might have been a guy who posted it, a study that said that you didn't need cognitive therapy, that the psychedelic drugs were doing enough reteaching of behavior. I didn't look into the
Yeah,
study. I
I
don't know if
didn't
you
read
saw
it
it or not,
either. I
but
saw
that
it.
one seemed interesting.
There's it creates a divide in the community because the big guys in the field like Robin Carhart Harris, I saw him chime in that he doesn't think that that's going to be the case based on all the stuff he's read, and that the set and the setting and the integration that happens after the experiences are important, because at that time your brain is more plastic, so it's going to be more willing to change. So ideally you would feed it with better information or be around more knowledgeable and wise people.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I did. It was last weekend or the weekend before? I don't know. It's been a blur. But I did like 14 assessments and I did a workshop, and it was interesting seeing people coming in. So this is a coming from a CrossFit background, but how well the body adapts. So all of these people were part of the same community, and the imbalance or lack of neural output and deficiencies that they had were all exactly the same. So it was funny because after the first day, it was like, well, we know what we're going to be working on next. And every single time, the symptoms showed themselves different in different parts of the body, but the root cause was always the same thing.
Mm.
Um, and it was, it's when I talk about, the emotional mapping and the behaviors happening, the body wants to survive, and therefore the way that you're programming in the gym, especially if you're doing like a bit large group class, right, for a large community, they're all going to develop the same movement patterns or lack, displacements of tension, and the symptoms I started to notice would show up based on their their past life events, shall we say, or how they perceived the world. And some were very prominent, some not so much. Um, but I think the interesting part was, we had a few that were having a conversation. I was like, hey, like where you're having the pain and the way to get out of the pain is going to force you to have an expression of anger. Um, how well are you? And of course, they're like, yeah, we don't express anger whatsoever. And then I was able to go, I was like, hey, did you have these types of life events happen in the past? And yes, they did. And they're like, I thought I signed up to get rid of physical pain, not to have like a conversation about past life events and such. Um, and I didn't need to know the details, but I think it's important, and that's why we have the courses with Moved Academy, because you will have clients that come into your community that the body has blocked certain experiences in order to best survive, and the best way to get through them is through physical intensity, but it is going to require an emotional expression of some sort, a little bit of that bottom up expression. Um, and so we had these conversations, and I mean it was great to see the transformation of people through physical intensity and just opening the doors, understanding what could be a potential of an expression, and watching them push hard and then get through that was beautiful. But I think that's where we're still lacking quite a bit within the fitness industry, is that lack of understanding physical intensity is not necessarily an acquisition of skill, but it's the capacity to create high neural output of the muscles. Um, and I think that I've had a little bit of backlash on Instagram, and I started to see people talk about, I don't know anything about stressors or overloading the muscles and the communication that goes back and forth. But when you go read about it, they talk about it at such a mechanical standpoint that you're forgetting that you're a human being that has a conscience, and that you are a learning machine trying to work on a bunch of different feedbacks that are going through you know different systems in your body. And I think that's the biggest issue that we see with high level athletes, that are just, you run faster, you develop the skill, and you're going to get better. You do until you plateau, and then most of the time that plateau tends to come from a behavioral blockage, which is interesting.
Yeah. The
Are you there?
the interesting thing about
Oh, I get the silence.
about what you said is that the movement patterns being similar between all members of a gym is exactly what Jack Cruz said on when I interviewed him. When I mentioned the emotional mapping stuff, he felt that those muscular patterns may dictate who you hang around with. So I thought that was an interesting concept to
Right.
think about, and it also leads me to think like the
Yeah.
same ideas with cellular and mitochondrial health is the same environment can lead to different diseases in different people, as in like the same stimulus can lead to different diseases. So it's not one thing causes one disease. It's you have an inherent pattern in you, so to speak, and that stress can precipitate an outcome, which could be pain in a certain area of your body, and it might be a different area of the body for somebody else based on how they're perceiving the world, not necessarily what actually happened.
Right. Yeah. It's that concept of perception, right, is interesting, because it's funny. I had one of the assessments that I did. She was like, there was pain in the like she would have like diaphragmatic discomfort on the right side, um, and then there was discomfort all on the right shoulder. But she went to go see specialists, and they're like, "Yeah, you're gonna have this pain the rest of your life." Like basically, nobody was able to give her an actual conclusion of how to get things better, because MRIs didn't show any structural damage. Movement wise, she has full range of motion. Like there's nothing really to release. There's nothing that's not working. So why should she have pain in their shoulder? And then I went a little bit to the low back. So again, I was like, okay, so lack of expression of anger, blah, 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 blah. And so as we were going, I was like, I had the history, um, and I was like, oh, okay, so that you have a lack of expressing the anger towards your father, and then having acceptance of it. Like you're trying, and we had this whole conversation. Um, and she was like, holy shit. And she was like, there was like the justification of it. Um, and then once we actually were started going through the physical intensity, and like really starting to push the body, um, she kind of we went back to Swami and what we've been talking about with the oscillation of movement. Um, and towards the end, she kind of had some tears come down, and she's like, okay, so now like I see the perception of like I've changed the perception of how I thought I saw the events happen, and this is how I'm seeing them. And as she started to talk, like the shoulder just started to drop, and then she was like, oh, that was interesting, and then no shoulder pain whatsoever. So it was just the amount of physical intensity that brought perspective to a certain life event that allowed her to gain a new perception of an outlook of how she views her father, which is or the fatherly figure, right? So it's interesting how you can just play back with these feedback loops, but always focusing on the physical aspect first,
Yeah, I wonder how much the
which
verbal
sounds like a bunch of
expression after you doing that played into it. Like you said, as she was speaking, the shoulder dropped. Was that verbal expression
mm-hmm.
and acceptance necessary after the fact as a form of expression?
Right, which I don't know. You know, I think when it's like a genuine form of expression is having that conversation truthfully, not because it's what I wanted to hear. You know what I mean? Like that, I think that's where it can really play a big role of actually letting go. Um, there was some tears that rolled down. So for me, I think that there was still like that. There was enough expression through the movement to get to that fight, which then allowed the flow, right, the empathy to come in afterwards. And so I think that there needs to, conversations are great, but there needs to be physical stress. It could be from conversation to physical stress back to conversation or journaling or writing. But when it's a genuine self that is actually having the conversation, not the super ego, right? So her telling me details or giving me a story, not because it's what I want to hear, but that's because that's exactly how she's feeling at the moment. I think that's the expression. We've talked about kind of these identities of the self, the id, the ego, the superego. They're playing. I think that was a conversation of the self, and that's the expression that we want to have.
Yeah, it goes back to Tony Robbins' approach of state and then story and then whatever else comes after, rather than trying to tell a different story in the state that you're in.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It was a bit. I had a great weekend. It was tiring, but it was good to see some people that really needed to have a new perspective of what training can be. Um, and how it can be therapeutic and really helpful. And it doesn't need to be, you don't need to get stuck on the story, which I think is, again, I'm not a therapist, I'm not licensed, this is not medical advice, blah, 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 blah. I'm just having a conversation with somebody that I care about and I want to make them feel better physically. And that translates over to them feeling better mentally and emotionally and overcoming these things. It's not about trying to dig and understand the details, and I'm not using any form of cognitive therapy in that sense. I'm just having a conversation with the client, and I think that that's the power that a coach can have, because if you can just truly care about somebody, take in their energy and have a connection and an actual conversation about how they're feeling and pick up on the state that they're in, then we can actually start to give, I like that idea that you said, like the state and then go into the story. The story is also how you express physically. So if you're, the philosophical approach of a bench press compared to a barbell back squat, compared to a sandbag carry or a sled sprint, those all have very different approaches and mentalities and intents that you can go into. And that's where having the knowledge and the wisdom as to how to approach them best, and not displacing with the holding of the breath or, displacement of movement, X, Y, and Z. That's where the true performance and the long-term value of training is going to come from. Otherwise you get stuck in these vicious cycles of insanity and you don't change how you move, and therefore you're going to hurt yourself because you are stuck and not wanting to let go of the ego, because this is how you've gotten so far, and you're refusing to change anything, and so therefore you keep going into this form of insanity where you lose the love and passion for what you were doing. And that also starts to change your perception of past events and future events.
Had some, I've increased the numbers in my group sessions that I do on a Sunday, which has been great. And something I've seen that maybe we don't have, well, maybe doesn't happen in other group gyms is, well, maybe it does. I don't know. Like if one person has a strong expression, either anger or tears or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
then the others still accept it and allow that person to kind of like reintegrate into the group whenever they're ready, which has been really cool to see. And people have been more open and
Okay.
willing to have certain conversations maybe that they'd never had before, or have ideas about certain things that are new and allow them to move forward, which has been great.
Yeah. And do you see the change in dynamic? Because you used to have how many people? I mean, having 10 people consistently is pretty legit.
Yeah, I would have struggled to have like 5 some weeks consistently. So it's almost doubled since
Okay.
the end of last year.
Nice. That's beautiful, dude. Consistency is king.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I think we're going to cut it there. I have a call in 10 minutes. So that was a good little quickie update for you guys. I have one room left in Croatia for the Movement Ayahuasca, April 24th to the 29th. I am coming out to the US in June 1st to the 5th to do a Movement Ayahuasca retreat. I will also be doing an Emotions in Our Muscles workshop and an assessment seminar. All of that will be in Idaho. So if you're interested, head on over to richardaceves.com or movedacademy.com. If you're in the UK, come join Dr. Ed on his, is it Sunday or Saturday classes?
Sunday morning. You have to do an assessment first so I can meet you one to one.
Sunday morning classes. Beautiful. Beautiful, guys. Make sure you guys follow along on Rare Barracuda, Dr. Ed Caddy on Instagram, on X, formerly known as Twitter. Catch you guys later. Peace.
Bye.